Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
All right, welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Degregori. And today we have an amazing guest with us, Sam Valme. He's a Senior Director, U.S. Channel Sales MSP team for AvePoint. I've known Sam for almost 10 years. Can you believe that? And I have seen him grow and lead with kindness in his career. And I've always been impressed and amazed with how you lead, sir. So welcome. Appreciate you being part of this podcast. And please introduce yourself. Tell us all about you.
I think you did better than I could have done. So I definitely appreciate it, Gino. It's always good to be here. And yeah, 10 years, you start to do the math and you're just like, well, like for me, it's almost a third of my life.
Wow.
Right. Like I've known you longer than some of my closer my friends. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey, especially the relationship between our companies. Starting off, obviously, been in engineering, but then moving over to more of the managing the partnerships here in the U.S. So not only being able to grow as friends, but also from a business perspective, has been an absolute honor. So happy to be here and expand on this concept that might seem obscure to some called kind leadership.
Right. Well, thank you for the background. So one of the first questions that I ask folks here is, what does it mean to be a kind leader to you? Mm-hmm. And define it in your own words, and then give us an example.
Yeah. Some folks, you may have seen that there's like a graphic that goes around the internet about being a leader. And the difference is that like a boss will sit at the back of the group and kind of just like crack the whip and move people forward, mm-hmm. whereas a leader is up front towing along with them. So I think that, being a leader is being at the forefront of everything you're doing and being in the weeds and actually understanding what it means to do the job. And the kindness aspect is the empathy piece. It's understanding that everybody else that's on the team behind you that's kind of moving forward, they're going through different things in their life. Different things motivate them. You can't treat everyone unilaterally the exact same. And the kind leadership aspect is taking the time to understand the uniqueness of all of your individual team members and really maximizing the impact they can have by ensuring that they're heard, they're understood. And what makes them unique is really being doubled down on. And their weaknesses are potentially something that we look at other team members to kind of fulfill. So that's hard to do. By taking that time, that's the kindness aspect, is taking the time to understand everybody and what makes them valuable.
Beautiful, beautiful. Do you have an example for us on what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, I have quite a few. I have a team now of less than 10 people. It fluctuates a little bit, but we're kind of growing at this time.
Good.
An example of that is, I'm in sales. I'm a sales manager. And it's understanding that, not everybody, how we structure our team is necessarily what we call our hunting and farming, right? Some are better at nurturing relationships. Some are going and finding new relationships. It's what's better for them. And an example of that for me would be taking the time to educate, clear expectation of what those two different roles in hunting and farming are, and helping someone who might think that like, hey, I really want to go out there and, find that business, and helping educate them, let them know, hey, I think you'd be better at the nurturing aspect, and here's why. Mm-hmm. And that takes time to kind of help somebody reframe what it is that they kind of their own headcanon, but kind of take that into effect of looking at what their actions are saying. So I think that's an example for me, is helping the team understand really where they fit best based off of their activities and their actions. Yeah.
Perfect. No, I like that because it's caring, right? Empathy, like understanding people's strengths and weaknesses, mm-hmm. and guiding them and impacting them, right? And influence them, all those different words as it relates to how are we helping them become a better version of themselves at the end of the day, right? Yeah. And if they become the better version of themselves, then mm-hmm. it helps your team deliver, be in the flow, executing, and you're going to have an amazing team.
Yeah. And it's not only the aspect of like moving people in the right spot, but making sure they're bought in, that they understand, and that they're like, oh yeah, you know what? You've given me clear examples of how, based off what I'm telling you, my actions, that this would be a better fit for me. Because if you just look at everything on a spreadsheet and you don't take the time to work with the individuals and help them make that decision almost for themselves, mm-hmm. it can kind of feel like, oh, well, this isn't where I saw myself, or this isn't a decision that's made with, my desires in mind. And that's what causes people to kind of detach from the business more if they don't feel really bought into the decisions like that.
Absolutely. And the buying in and the purpose, right, is very good. You have to have that vision, not only at the company level, but also at your team level too. What do you want to accomplish? And looking at all the different individuals and how they fit into that vision is very important, and working with them to make sure that they're doing that. So as it relates to, for example, not everybody's the same, right? So when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, right, in leadership, right, is there a difference on how you lead the different people, trying to understand everybody and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's challenging because on the one hand, you do want to treat people equitably, which is slightly different than equally, right? And they sometimes get confused. And that's understanding that if I have someone that's a new mother, they might need to take a little bit more time off, but they're still being held to the same expectation as far as like a revenue commitment, right? So where do we kind of backfill that time? Or if it's somebody that had a death in the family, making sure that we understand, right, the time they need, and not just, take whatever, the PTO policy says, but like really take the time you need for mental health. But also, once again, recognizing we still have a number to hit because we are in a sales organization. So I think when it comes to DEI, diversity and inclusion, you really need to start with, once again, understanding who the individuals are. But then when you look at it from a business perspective, you also need to make sure that when you're working in a city, state, region, that typically you want your workforce to look somewhat like the communities that you're serving as well. Now, the way that we impact that is it's not only looking at making sure that our job descriptions are clear and are equitable, making sure that we have, that old line, well, you have to have like 5 years of experience for a new position or what should be like entry level position, right? Making sure we don't have stuff like that. Right. But make sure we look at things like, hey, you can have a 4-year degree or you have to have relevant experience, making sure that's clearly understood. That way folks who may be very well qualified but didn't have the same educational opportunities still feel inclined to try. So we can do that at a kind of a hiring level. And also from a DEI perspective, it's making sure you're aware the candidates are. So what we do a lot, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, even more, is I also lead an organization called AvePoint Excellence. And one of the things that we do is we work with our people team to ensure that we have equitable hiring practices by actually going to colleges that might be HBCUs or have a really heavy minority basis to make sure our applicants are coming from that kind of that diverse candidacy pool too. So if you start at the hiring, right, you start from the job descriptions and where you're trying to get your talent from, you're going to see more of an influence on that, of course, inside your workforce. And then from there, making sure that when those candidates are in place, you understand their backgrounds and you understand what kind of makes them unique to, once again, make sure they're in the best position for, where they're coming from as an employee.
Gotcha. That's beautiful. And what was the name of the organization?
It's AvePoint Excellence. We call it
okay.
BAY for short.
BAY. Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. Very nice. How long you been doing that?
So this will be my 4th year running that organization. It actually was kind of stemmed from some of the incidents going on, obviously folks living through the George Floyd kind of era, the Black Lives Matters movement. We really asked ourselves, what can we do? Right. A common thing that I try to tell to folks is you might not be able to change the world, but you can change someone's world. Yep. Right. So what can we do today? What's your superpower? What are you really good at? Is it organizing people? Do you know a local nonprofit? Right. If you can do one thing, you can make a difference. And what you'll find is when you run organizations like that and groups, everybody wants to participate, but often they just don't know what they can do. Right. So for me, it's really just making sure that everybody finds something, one thing that they can really do, and also getting our great partners like Bravo Consulting Group involved as well to kind of help spread some of those missions forward.
I appreciate that, and that's what I love about you, Sam. It's you not only care, but you take the initiative to move it forward, right? A lot of people can talk about it. Yeah. Right? Oh yeah, this sucks, or people need to do that. We'll figure out or let somebody else do it, right? Yeah. And then it never happens, right? So creating that impact, that's always been impressed, by you and how you lead. And one of the main reasons, I ask you to be part of this podcast, so you can share with folks on those things, right? One of the things that I wanted to know, pull a thread on what you were saying about the diversity and inclusion is people are different, whether it's education, whether it's female or race, or everybody's different. Do you see a difference in the way people think about themselves kind of impact the way they lead?
There's this idea, it's probably not an idea. It's probably been studied many times that, bullies often, that's not their natural nature. There's something else going on, and that's how they're just essentially conveying those feelings, right? Something's going on at home, or they have some type of like self-conscious issue, and that's what's kind of causing the outbursts, right, or the bullying tendencies. Right. So from a leadership perspective, I think that your confidence does absolutely play into how you lead people. That could be insecurity in your role. It could be lack of clarity from maybe the leaders above you. One thing that folks realize that the higher they get up in leadership is that the higher you go in an organization, typically the less and less kind of tactical instruction you get. So you get kind of the mission, but it's up to you as the leader to put together the strategy and the individual tactics. Whereas if you're a line level employee, you're being told exactly what to do, when to do it, what the outcome needs to be, right? So people feel naturally that in their career, they have to get into leadership roles to, quote, progress, unquote.
Right.
That's not always the case. And for those that aren't really natural leaders, if their progression path has moved them to that leadership position, they are going to find themselves very uncomfortable. I use the analogy, some people are good at working in boxes and some people are good at making boxes. Right. Okay. And if you have someone that's not good at making boxes in a leadership position, you're going to start to see those phrase happening, right? They're going to start to getting frustrated. Well, what do you mean you didn't do what I told you to do?
Right.
Well, you weren't really clear. What do you mean I wasn't clear? I sent an email, right? Did you not? If you had questions, why didn't you come to clarify, right? Well, they didn't come to clarify because you thought you were going to react exactly the way that you were reacting, right? So yeah, I think that how you feel about yourself directly goes into it. And really how you overcome that as a leader, especially as a kind leader, is clarity. Right. And that's if you don't have clarity from the management team above you, requesting it, number one, or being clear about what it is that you're going to do and specifically how you plan to do it. And if they come back and they're just like, sure, all right. And making sure you're clearly passing that down the line to your own employees. Yeah. So if you're clear, that takes away a lot of the anxiety. It takes away a lot of the animosity that your team might have and allows you to kind of open up a bit more. And it reduces the confusion from your own team when deadlines are missed or, numbers aren't hit. Well, we were very clear on the strategy. You agreed as well. Right. So I don't have to be mean about it. We can have a discussion about it and kind of make those adjustments as needed.
Yeah, communication is key, right? Yeah. And being clear on what you are trying to convey. And I can sense, or I've been in situations where the leader was not clear on what they wanted. And they expected them to know it, right? Read my mind, right? And then they get frustrated, and that's where the anger, the mean and bullying, like you were saying, right? If you're not clear, right? So if you want to be a good, kind leader, you want to make sure that you are clear and we have the right intentions. And then on the flip side, as an individual, like you said, you don't have to feel like you have to have a leadership title in order to lead. I've seen you lead many times, as an engineer, let's say, you were coming up with ideas and you were very curious. What about this? What about that? And that's what it takes, at the end of the day to kind of continue to move forward with the stuff. And you don't have to bulldoze anybody. You don't have to be mean about it. Hey, get out of my way. It's like, how can we collectively work together to rise together to make an impact at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So from an impact or kind leadership in an organization, what do you think is needed, right, in order to start shifting that organizational culture into leading with kindness? What do you think is required or needed, or from your perspective?
Well, the first thing we have to do is at the highest level, you have to ensure that your executive leadership team or senior leadership team has that culture built into themselves. And this is one thing I think, and I'll just use my company. I've been here for 10 years, so I can use it as an example, and I really have to commend them for. Our executive leadership team, they are very direct and blunt with one another to make sure that the mission of the business is clear amongst themselves.
Yep.
There might be yelling, there might be tears, there might be whatever needs to happen within that ecosystem of themselves, right? I'm definitely not, every leader, but if it needs to get there, because sometimes you really need to dig in to make sure, like, no, do you really understand me when I say that we need to get to X, Y, and Z? And then what they are masters of is making sure that the next layer, so will be myself, right, as one of the senior managers, that it's distilled down and there's a sense of like calm, right?
Yep.
It's kind of that storming and norming kind of thing, in running teams. By the time the messaging gets to me, it's very clear, like, okay, I know some people will probably upset that okay, but hey, but this is what we're doing now. This team right here, this core, we did what we needed to do and we're clear.
Yeah.
And then the expectation is now that you have that clarity, kind of moving that down. So there's a sense of calm the further you get from there. So I think that as a business, as a leader, you have to be willing to recognize that, okay, how do we get to calm, right? What is dangerous is that if you don't get that clarity at the core and then try to move outward, the storm ends up happening kind of on these tides and rifts outside of that core of the leadership team, right? That's when individual teams get frustrated because they're like, wait a second, based on what my manager said, that second layer, I should be succeeding, and now you're saying I'm failing, right? So I think that if you're going to make that shift as an organization, your core team needs to make it a part of their culture to make sure that that clarity comes, and whatever needs to happen within that core is done. And then from there, smooth waters, right? Glass water from there. Right.
And I think that calmness is trust, right?
Yeah.
I think is that trust that you build. You have to have that trust at the leadership level and in an entire organization for sure, right? And we talked about that in the other podcast too, as it relates to how do you build trust? You have to go through some of those challenges, those battles. One of the things that we do in our leadership offsite, we call this a 5-5-5, which is you have 5 minutes to express yourself on some challenge you had the previous quarter for 5 minutes. You can talk or, as little as 1 minute or 5 minutes, right? The next 5 minutes is everybody in the room asks you questions about that problem.
Right.
Right? Like, why is that happening? Why do you feel that is happening? Blah, blah, blah. No solutions, just digging deeper into the root cause of what could be happening, right? To that individual.
Yeah.
And then the last 5 minutes is solving. Like collectively solving. Well, have you considered this? Or have you tried this? Have you tried that? And you go deep. And, I've seen people express themselves and, coming out of that, it's like, okay, that was, it was tough going through it.
Yeah.
But I think I was able to understand people's perspective and their feedback and how I can become better, right? So, I wanted to share that because even from a kind leadership perspective, there's times there's just going to be friction. There's times there's going to be challenges, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to be mean per se, but it means that you just got to come at it with an open heart, like an open mind, right?
Yeah, you do. And I think that there's two. We've done a similar activity. Tears start flowing, right? And I've heard the stories, but I've noticed a trend, especially when it comes to leadership and working, where there's two typical walls that I could put up that's really hard people to overcome. The first wall is like, I'm running into a personal issue that is causing me to not perform, that I don't quite feel comfortable expressing. Right. Once again, in the broad sense, that's between the manager and the employee. The employee can give as much as they'd like. But if that is at that executive leadership, senior leadership team, where there's something going on and there's nobody else higher, like we are it, you have to be vulnerable with your peers to make sure that's understood. It could be a sick family member, maybe yourself, right? It could be a divorce. But it's important, if you're holding in and not being expressive and people are seeing a lack of performance, if you don't communicate, then there's no way that we can help build up around you, right? To kind of help insulate some of those challenges. And the second thing is when you feel as though you have a direct conflict with somebody and you don't want to address it, right? Sometimes there is this sense of, almost being too kind, right? And like, hey, this is the person that keeps actually failing and this is the reason that I'm failing, but I don't want to address that person, let them know that they're failing, right? You have to create a culture where you can have that direct feedback. Prior to AvePoint, I worked at Dell, and prior to Dell, I worked at Apple. And one of the things that we learned when being onboarded, and just as a small detail, Apple's onboarding and training was partially designed by the folks at the Ritz-Carlton. At least that's what I was explaining when I was in it. And one of the things they talked about was how you provide not only feedback to your peers, but also to your management team, making sure, number one, hey, is now a good time for feedback, and making sure you're doing it in private. There's certain things that you need to do when it comes to feedback. One of the weirdest ones I think that most folks don't feel comfortable with is asking if now's a good time for feedback. Right. Reason being, if you're on the sales floor, right, talking to a customer and they just made you upset, it may not be the best time for feedback, right? But at your organization, it's something I still do to this day. And when it comes to giving feedback, there's actually in the matrix, and it's difficult to explain on audio, but I'll try. There's general, specific, positive, and negative. Right. And if you think about like those on quadrants. And the general principle behind this is that specific feedback, be it positive or negative, is always more valuable than just general feedback. General feedback being you did a good job. right? That's positive.
Right.
General negative feedback being you did terrible, right?
Right.
Specifically, you did great during this conversation because you said X, Y, and Z. Negative feedback being you could have done better doing X, Y, and Z, right?
I like that.
So when we're giving feedback as an organization, if you have a specific problem or you know an individual needs to improve to help you be better at your job, part of that kindness is number one, finding the right time and place to provide that feedback. Might not be on the call with the customer, might not be among their peers. Right. Maybe it's a one-on-one meeting that you schedule, maybe it's at a happy hour. Right. But the second thing is always being specific with that feedback. Don't run in and tell somebody that you know might be impacting your business negatively, oh, you suck. Right. That's not helpful. Hey, my business is being impacted because of X, Y, and Z activity that your team runs, that you an individual, your responsibilities. And then lastly, of course, is come to the table with solutions. Yeah. I think we could improve if we did X, Y, and Z. What are your thoughts?
That's amazing. Right? Yeah. That's great. That's definitely taking notes on those few things. I'm going to have to listen back to this because general feedback, like you said, is definitely not. It's like
it's nice, but
it is nice or bad, and sometimes right, but right. It's not going to move the needle for that individual. It's not going to help them right at the end of the day. So being very specific, and I can relate to both being the receiver and the giver when it comes to that kind of stuff. We're like, oh, good job, right? Yeah. Even with my kids, right? I'm like, yeah, good job. Or like being very specific is almost like we're doing a disservice if we're not being specific to help the individual out. So speaking of that, mentorship and the role in developing kind leaders, right? I know Bay is the organization you've 4 years now, kind of within AvePoint, but what do you think is required or needed, in order to really build the next generation of kind leaders?
Yeah. For anybody that's a music fan, there's a song by J. Cole called Middle Child, where essentially J. Cole's a rapper and he talks about how, being essentially the middle child coming up after Jay-Z, but before, some of the newer people in the game and kind of being in the middle there. I find myself very much related to that. And what I'm seeing now, the more I get into my career, is there is this next generation coming up. And it's something I'm even talking about with my own team, right? We have to kind of build that next layer of management. And the biggest thing we can really do to impact that is to empower those individuals and let them know, like, you are my succession plan, right? Yep. So whether that's, I have a member of my team, I just had our second daughter, and I was out for a month in January. Right. And I was very clear with my team member, like, hey, you're my team lead. These are all the expectations I have. This is my leave plan while I'm out. You're it. Right. You're running the boat while I'm out. And then also too, what part of that empowering is not only telling that individual, but also championing outside of your own inner circle, letting other leaders know, hey, this individual is representing me while I'm out. Right. I think by giving that leader the clear instruction on what they're supposed to do, but also knowing like, hey, he just didn't tell, our team. He told the greater team, the executive vice president of sales knows I'm the person. Yeah. I think that's really important in empowering that new generation. And then it's also, of course, leading by example, right? You have to make sure that as you're running a team or you're having a team meeting, they see how you interact, they see how you engage, because whether it's intentional or unintentional, we tend to imitate people that we respect. Right. Hopefully your team members respect you. Yeah. So you can be sure that if you're speaking to the team a certain way or you're acting a certain way, when they have their one-on-ones, they are going to operate within some of the same mannerisms because they idealize kind of what that view looks like and they're trying to replicate it. So I think that, making sure that you empower the team members, right? Making sure that they're clear on what their expectations are, but then also making sure you're giving that good example for them to follow through on. And then, going back to what we talked about previously, giving that feedback. If you identify challenges, making sure that you're providing not only feedback that's positive or negative specifically, but also doing it quickly. Right. That was another tenet we actually learned was time does matter when it comes to feedback. Giving somebody feedback on an issue they may have had 3 months ago, way less impactful than if you do it the next week or the next day.
Yeah, when it actually happened.
Right. So those are all things, right? If you give them that power, you give them that feedback and give them that modeling, I think you're going to raise more kind leaders in the future because they'll have somebody to learn from and it won't just be reading a book or going on YouTube and watching a TED Talk.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sam. And I think empowering is key, but also from a leadership perspective, the trust needs to be there both ways, right? Not just as an employee trusting their leader that they're doing the right thing, but then the leader trusting that the employee will do the right things. But turning it back to what you said, it's communication, empowerment, as well as clear expectation on what's going to happen, right? So I'm hoping that you were able to enjoy your time off with your little one, and the house didn't burn, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I forgot where I read it, but there was I read a passage in a book. They said the sign of a good business is that you can leave and it's not going to burn down.
Exactly.
The sign of a great business is you leave and it gets better. Right?
I like that.
So I was very proud of the fact that I was able to leave and we were able to make strides as a team and continue moving forward with our mission, right? You know, of course I was available, but for the most part, right, I was able to, I slept perfectly well, you know, until the baby came, right? You know, but I had no concerns, right, that anything, and if there was an issue that really did require my attention, I had no concerns that I wasn't going to be alerted.
Right.
So those are all things that, it's that trust. Group too.
And you know, being transparent for me is, you know, as an entrepreneur, you know, building this company for the last 16 years, right? And it's trusting, empowering, right? And trusting that your team at the leadership level as well as below that management level can take care. And I love what you said. It's like, if I leave, the house will continue to be fine, but what I want is I want it to be better. Right. So they don't need me anymore. You know?
That's the ultimate goal of a business owner too, right? It's an entrepreneur. It's like because I mean, I'm sticking on kind leadership, but going into entrepreneurship a little bit, right? That's how you turn that business. You turn it from a job into a true asset. Right. Like it turns into like a stock where it's just like, well, it's going to keep getting better without me, right? CEOs in place, you're good. So
exactly. So amazing conversation, amazing advice and feedback for our audience here. So definitely a lot of great nuggets that we'll definitely take on to. So as we're kind of closing out here the episode, any aspiring words that you want to share with the future kind leaders?
I don't want to be, I think the correct word would be pedantic, but be, as in going like too deep into words of wisdom. But I've already said a few of them on here, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're leading by example. You want to make sure that you're creating, when we talk about making boxes, right? As a leader, you want to make sure you're making environments that you would also want to be in. You really want to make sure that you really analyze and take a hard look at when you go home at night. Do you have the Monday, what they call Sunday scaries, right? When you come to work on Monday, does it give you anxiety? Anxiety and stress cause so many issues in our lives, whether it be our health, physical health, mental health. As a leader, you have a unique opportunity to not only resolve the challenges you might be facing on those two fronts, but think about this, right? Maybe it's been a while since you had a boss, but for the most part, right? When you're sitting at home having dinner with your family or your loved ones, most people, your boss is the topic of conversation, right? You talk about your employees, how your day went. Oh, my boss did X, Y, and Z. There's a project, right? So as a kind leader, you think about, right? If you're a leader of people, you might be the topic of conversation at dinner for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 families.
Wow. Yeah.
If you think about that, right? You don't think no one
thinks about that, right?
Think about yourself as a celebrity or anything. But
right.
You are someone that is in constant communication, right? So every single thing you do is, being kind of picked apart and analyzed a little bit. And you want to make sure that you're conscious of that. And not only being a topic of conversation, but also the trust that your employees have on you. And I deeply realize this having now my 2 daughters. And I told our executive vice president of sales, like, when I say I'm all in, like, this is my family's financial plan. This is my legacy. I'm betting on this. Right. So I would only gift you my skills and time if I believed you. And to me, the only thing that can justify that is being someone of integrity, someone of kindness, right, as a leader. So what you get is what you put into it. And if you create that environment to attract those kind of employees, you are going to be better for it. And you can only do that if you are expressing those traits of a kind leader.
I love the passions there, Sam. You know, all in. I love it, It's amazing. And I feel it too as a partner, right? You're all into the focus, the dedication, and the commitment you have for AvePoint and your team, for sure. So thank you for that amazing advice. So one other question: if you could have coffee with anyone alive or from the past, who would it be and why?
Oh my God! Despite folks listening in, and I was talking now for quite a few minutes, this has been like taking up 5% of my brain capacity the whole time. So I would probably pick Barack Obama.
Okay.
And the reason I pick, and there's somebody else, but I'll pick one. The reason I pick Obama is because obviously I read him and Michelle's book, so I have a deeper understanding of what it took. But I think, especially from a leadership perspective, after reading it, kind of watching and learning, and obviously it was an influential time in my life because I think I was like 17 or 18 the first time he got elected. I don't think I can vote in the first election, but the second one, right? So I was really paying attention at that time of my life and seeing that happen, and it wasn't lost on me the impact that it took, and also the risks it took as well to be at that tier of leadership, and then to also appreciate the fact that by the time things got to his desk, it was a bad decision left or right. Right? And you might experience this too, especially as a CEO, right? By the time, if your team members are in place to kind of filter out some of the basic stuff, by the time it gets to you, often you got to make a tough decision.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, and then, I mean, even getting to the point where they're starting to give you statistics on that tough decision, right? So how do you even make that? And going against your advisors sometime. So I think thinking about it from a pure leadership perspective, he's someone I'd be interested to understand even more. Like, how do you take the facts, distill them down, but then how do you also place that intrinsic trust in your advisory team,
right,
to really like know either way someone might lose their life. I'm just trying to mitigate the damage as best I can, right? Yeah. Now, I'm in a fortunate position. We're not out here saving the elephants at my job.
Right.
But I think some of those practices and principles do roll downhill, right? And how you build that next level of leadership behind you, how you really take into account your advisors, and how you live with potentially making a mistake. Or at that point, it's not even a mistake. It's how you live with making a decision that didn't turn out the way you were hoping. So I think that would be a really fascinating conversation to have.
Beautiful. I love it. Yeah, I would love to hang out with them as well.
Yeah, for a couple hours.
Yeah, seems like a great guy. All right, where can audience get a hold of you?
The best place will be LinkedIn. Okay. Sam Valme Jr., not my father. Okay. He's a senior. He writes books and stuff. He's also a PhD. I'm not a PhD. You quickly find that out. Okay. So yeah, that'd be the best place. LinkedIn be the easiest, but I don't really have, because of my, I got family that works with the government, so I don't really have a whole lot of social media outside of that.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's it.
Perfect. I know you've given a lot of great advice, a lot of tidbits, a lot of, great nuggets for us to really understand and start incorporating in our organization or in our life in general, right? But any final thoughts? Like, it could be one word if you like, but just any final.
Be the change you want to see.
Ooh, I like it.
Like I said earlier, you might not be able to change the world, but you can change someone's world. Everybody has a superpower. Figure out what it is and double down on that and do something.
Be the change you want to be.
Yeah.
Love it. And this is what we're doing every day, right? And this is one of the main reasons I put together the podcast, and because there wasn't anything about kind leadership, and we're seeing that, and there's many kind leaders out there that we're creating this platform, and we're going to continue to build a brand awareness on what does it mean to be a kind leader and make an impact at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Also, well, thank you very much, Sam, for your time, for coming out here and being a great guest for us. And with that, be kind, bring value, rise together, everybody. Have a great day.